It was a quiet morning in the wealthy neighborhood of North Hills just outside Atlanta, the kind of place where lawns looked painted, where silence cost more than most people's homes, and where smiles were just another way to show superiority. Inside one of those mansions, a young woman named Naomi Carter moved carefully through polished marble halls. She carried a small bucket, a cloth, and a quiet dream no one knew about. Naomi was 23, soft-spoken, with eyes that held both kindness and the weight of years spent proving her worth. She worked for Mrs. Evelyn Monroe, a woman as rich as she was ruthless. Evelyn had inherited her husband's fortune and his arrogance. To her, the staff were background noise, invisible hands that kept her perfect world spotless. Naomi had learned to stay silent, to move like a shadow. But sometimes, when the world outside those golden walls felt too heavy, she sang, just softly, under her breath, as if whispering her heart's secret into the air. That morning, she sang one of her grandmother's songs, an old gospel tune that spoke of hope and freedom. Her voice was pure and steady, filling the room like sunlight through the blinds. She didn't know that Mrs. Monroe was already awake, sitting in her study, irritated by the sound. At first, Evelyn tried to ignore it, but the melody wouldn't stop. Gentle, sincere, too human for a house that worshipped silence. Her face tightened. She rose from her velvet chair, heels clicking sharply on marble, and followed the voice. Naomi was dusting the crystal chandelier when Evelyn's cold shadow appeared behind her. "What?" she said sharply. "Do you think you're doing?" Naomi froze. The song died on her lips. She turned, stammering, I'm sorry, ma'am, I didn't mean to what? Disturb the peace. This isn't a concert hall. You're here to clean, not to perform." Naomi lowered her eyes. "Yes, ma'am, I apologize." Evelyn crossed her arms. "I don't pay people to sing. If you want to play star, do it on your own time, somewhere else." Naomi nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Understood, ma'am." Evelyn smirked. "You people always think a little talent means something. It doesn't. It never does. Now get back to work before my guests arrive." The words hit harder than any slap could. Naomi bowed her head and turned away, pretending her eyes weren't filling with tears. She went back to polishing, her reflection trembling in the glass. The other staff exchanged glances, silent sympathy from those who'd all been humiliated before. But no one dared speak, not in Mrs. Monroe's house. As the morning went on, Evelyn prepared for an important guest, the famous music producer, Richard Hale. He was coming to discuss a charity gala, one Evelyn had planned mostly to show off her influence. To her, reputation was everything. Kindness was decoration. But to Naomi, even the smallest act of grace mattered. When the cook dropped a plate, Naomi helped her pick it up. When the gardener looked exhausted, she brought him water. She didn't do it for praise, only because it was right. Still, the sting of humiliation lingered. Her song had been her comfort, a small piece of joy in a place where joy wasn't allowed. And now even that had been taken. She finished dusting the chandelier and moved to the piano room, a grand space Naomi loved, though she had never dared touch the keys. It was filled with framed photos of Evelyn and her late husband with celebrities and politicians, a shrine to success. She stood there for a moment, staring at the piano. Her fingers twitched, the silence pressed against her, and then, almost without thinking, she began to hum again, so quietly that even she could barely hear it. It was the same melody, the same gospel her grandmother taught her on summer nights back home in Georgia, the kind of song that carried faith through pain, light through darkness. Her voice rose just a little, the sound trembling but beautiful. And somewhere upstairs, Evelyn Monroe froze again. She had been arranging flowers when the sound floated up the staircase, the same melody she had just forbidden. Her jaw tightened. "Unbelievable," she muttered, setting down the vase. "She just doesn't learn." But this time, Evelyn wasn't the only one who heard. A black sedan had just pulled up outside. A man in his 50s stepped out, silver-haired, dressed in quiet luxury. His name was Richard Hale, and as the housekeeper opened the door to let him in, The faint sound of Naomi's singing reached him from the back of the house. He paused, just for a moment. There was something raw in that voice, untrained but real, like the kind of soul you couldn't buy or fake. He smiled faintly. "Who's singing?" he asked. The housekeeper blinked. "Probably the maid, sir. Naomi." "Naomi," he repeated softly, as the melody echoed through the hall. And in that instant, before anyone knew what would happen, fate began to turn quietly, like a key sliding into a lock that had been waiting years to open. Naomi kept singing, unaware that her voice had just found the one person who could change her life forever. Naomi didn't know that someone had stopped in the grand foyer to listen. She kept singing softly, dusting the piano lid, her voice blending with the quiet hum of morning light. Her melody floated through the house like a forgotten prayer. And at that very moment, Richard Hale stood near the doorway, head tilted, eyes closed. For a man who'd spent decades surrounded by polished perfection, the kind that sells millions but says nothing, that voice struck something deep. It wasn't trained, it wasn't polished, but it was real. It was alive. Evelyn Monroe descended the stairs, her tone bright and false. "Mr. Hale, what a pleasure finally. I've been looking forward to this meeting." He smiled politely, but his mind was elsewhere. "Thank you, Evelyn. I couldn't help noticing. Someone was singing when I came in." Her smile faltered. "Oh, that. Just one of my staff. I keep telling them this isn't a church." Richard chuckled lightly, still listening. "Funny. It sounded like heaven." Evelyn blinked, unsure whether he was joking. "Well, they tend to forget their place. Shall we talk in the study?" He nodded, following her, but his gaze drifted toward the music room where the voice had come from. As they entered the study, the melody faded. The house fell silent again, and Evelyn regained her confidence. She began explaining her plans for the charity gala, the donors, the photographers, the exclusive guest list that would make headlines. But Richard's mind lingered on that song. He'd heard thousands of voices, some flawless, some famous, none as sincere as the one in this house. At one point, he interrupted gently. "Evelyn, would you excuse me for a moment? I'd like to stretch my legs. Beautiful property you have here." "Of course," she said, pretending not to mind. "Do explore. Everything in this house is worth seeing." He smiled, but what he wanted to see wasn't made of marble or gold. He followed the faint echo of a hum through the hall until he reached the piano room. Naomi stood there, her back turned, quietly wiping the keys with a soft cloth. She was humming again, unaware that the world outside her voice had just stopped to listen. Richard spoke gently. "That's a beautiful song." Naomi gasped and spun around. "Oh, I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't realize anyone was here." He raised a hand, reassuring. "No need to apologize. I should be the one thanking you. It's been a long time since I heard someone sing with that much heart." Her eyes widened. "Thank you, sir. I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't," he said with a kind smile. "What's your name?" "Naomi. Naomi Carter." "Naomi," he repeated, as if testing the sound. "You have a gift, Naomi. Did you ever think of doing something with it?" She hesitated. "I used to dream about singing, but dreams don't pay bills, sir. So I work." Richard nodded slowly, studying her. "I understand. But talent like that doesn't come around often." Before Naomi could reply, the sharp sound of heels echoed down the hall. Evelyn's voice followed, brittle and sharp. "There you are, Mr. Hale. I was wondering where you'd gone." She glanced at Naomi, her tone turning icy. "Naomi, shouldn't you be cleaning the terrace?" Naomi lowered her head. "Yes, ma'am, I was just finishing here." Evelyn forced a laugh. "You'll have to forgive her, Richard. She tends to forget her duties sometimes." He frowned slightly. "She's doing them just fine, from what I can tell, and singing beautifully while she's at it." Evelyn's smile froze. "Singing? Oh, that. She does that often. I've told her it's unprofessional." "Unprofessional?" he echoed softly. Funny. I'd call it inspiring. For a moment, tension filled the room. Evelyn didn't know how to respond, and she just stood there, clutching her pearl necklace like a shield. Naomi tried to retreat quietly, but Richard stopped her. Naomi, would you do me a favor? Could you sing a little of that song again? Her eyes widened in panic. Here? Now? Yes, he said simply. Please. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Richard, this is hardly the time. But he didn't move. His tone was calm, polite, but final. I insist. Naomi swallowed hard, heart pounding. Her hands trembled slightly as she faced the room. She took a breath, small at first, then deep, and let the song flow out. The same melody she'd sung that morning filled the air again, richer this time, braver. Her voice rose and fell like water over stone. Smooth, pure, alive. It carried something that no stage ever could. Truth. Richard listened, eyes glistening. Even Evelyn couldn't look away. The sound seemed to melt the chill in the room. When the last note faded, there was silence, then Richard exhaled slowly. That was extraordinary. Naomi lowered her gaze. Thank you, sir. Evelyn forced a smile, trying to regain control. Well, I suppose the acoustics in this house flatter anyone. But her voice wavered, because deep down, even she had felt something. Something she couldn't quite name. Richard turned to Naomi again. Do you work here full-time? Yes, sir, 6 days a week. He nodded thoughtfully. Would you mind if I stopped by again soon? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. Naomi blinked, unsure what he meant. Of course, sir. Evelyn tried to laugh it off. Oh, Richard, surely you're not planning to hire my maid for your concerts? He smiled faintly. I don't hire singers, Evelyn. I discover them. Her face stiffened. Surely you're joking. But he wasn't. His tone was quiet, certain. I don't joke about music. He turned back to Naomi. You have something rare. Hold on to it, no matter who tells you not to. And with that, he nodded politely to both women and left the room. Evelyn stood frozen, her confidence cracked like glass. She didn't know whether to feel embarrassed or angry. Naomi, meanwhile, stood in silence, confused, hopeful, terrified all at once. When Evelyn finally spoke, her voice was sharp again, but weaker than before. Get back to work. Naomi nodded and left quietly, though her heart beat with something new. A small, fragile flame of possibility. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine what it might feel like to sing on a real stage, under real lights, for people who actually listened. And somewhere in that grand house, Evelyn Monroe sat alone in her silence, replaying the song she had tried to silence, realizing that, for once, her house had heard something money could never buy. Days turned into weeks, and the world outside that mansion kept spinning, busy, noisy, forgetful. But Naomi hadn't forgotten that moment in the piano room. She thought about Richard Hale's words every night as she finished her chores and walked home beneath the orange Atlanta sky. You have something rare. Hold on to it. Sometimes she'd hum quietly as she swept, afraid someone might hear but unable to silence the part of her that still believed. Then one evening, as she was leaving work, she noticed a black car parked near the gate. The tinted window rolled down, and there he was, Richard Hale, the man who had heard her sing. Naomi, he said with a warm smile, I was hoping to see you. Her heart jumped. Mr. Hale, I didn't think you'd come back. I told you I would, he said. There's an audition tomorrow at my studio downtown. A small one, nothing formal. Just me, a piano, and your voice. Will you come? She hesitated. The thought terrified her. What if she wasn't good enough? What if Evelyn found out? But then she saw the sincerity in his eyes, the kind that didn't promise fame, only opportunity. Yes, she whispered. I'll come. The next morning, Naomi called in sick for the first time in 2 years. She took the bus across the city, clutching a small notebook filled with lyrics she'd written over the years. The studio was nothing like she'd imagined. simple, calm, filled with instruments that seemed to hum with history. Richard was waiting by the piano. "Take a deep breath," he said. "Forget everyone else. Just sing." She nodded, hands trembling. And when she began, her nerves disappeared. Her voice filled the room, rich, clear, alive. Richard closed his eyes and smiled. When she finished, the room was silent for a moment before he said quietly, "Naomi, that wasn't singing. That was truth." She laughed nervously. "Is that good or bad?" "It's the only thing that matters." He asked her to record a demo. She sang again, this time with more confidence. When it ended, he looked at her with quiet certainty. "You're ready." Naomi's world changed that day. What began as a whisper in a mansion became a storm in the city. Within weeks, her voice found its way onto the airwaves. One song, one story, one chance that finally found the right ears. The demo went viral. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real. The internet called her the Maid with the golden voice. News crews came looking for her, but Naomi stayed humble, still helping her neighbors, still singing in the small church where it all began. And one evening, as she prepared for her first televised performance, a familiar face appeared backstage. Evelyn Monroe. Naomi froze. She hadn't seen her since the day everything began. Evelyn looked smaller somehow, not in size, but in pride. She approached slowly. "Naomi, I wanted to see you before you went on. I didn't come to make excuses, I came to say I was wrong." Naomi's eyes softened. "You don't owe me anything, ma'am." Evelyn shook her head. "Yes, I do. I judged you by the uniform you wore, not the heart you carried. That day I tried to silence you, and you turned that silence into music the whole world can hear. I just wanted to say thank you for teaching me something I should have learned long ago." Naomi smiled gently. "Sometimes the only way people learn is when they finally have to listen." Evelyn nodded, eyes glistening. "Break a leg out there." When the lights went down and the music swelled, Naomi stepped onto the stage. Not as a maid, not as a servant, but as a woman who had turned pain into purpose. She sang the same gospel melody she once whispered while dusting chandeliers. But now her voice soared, filling every corner of the theater, reaching hearts that needed to believe again. In the front row sat Richard Hale, smiling proudly. And somewhere backstage, Evelyn Monroe stood in the shadows, wiping a tear from her eye. When the final note faded, the crowd rose to its feet. The applause was thunderous. But Naomi didn't think of fame or money. She thought of her grandmother's voice, of faith that never dies, and of the moment she chose to keep singing when the world told her not to. Later, as the cameras flashed and the interviewer asked how it all began, Naomi smiled softly and said, "I was just cleaning one day and someone told me to stop singing. I almost listened, but I'm glad I didn't." And the world listened, truly listened. Never let someone's cruelty silence your gift. You never know who's listening when you choose to shine. If Naomi's story moved you, share it with someone who's ever doubted themselves. Because sometimes all it takes is one voice, one moment of courage, to change everything. Subscribe for more stories that remind you. Kindness, talent, and faith always find their way to the light.